Hello and welcome back to the Roundup by News of the Week, the show where I, Jay Whitwell, summarise and explain the news, helping you to stay informed. This week's episode goes into some of the significant events that have happened in the last week in British politics. For example, the UK preparing for a visit from Trump, a joint action deal being agreed between France and the UK over illegal immigration, and a change to how we do big infrastructure in this country, as well as obviously all manner of other things. If this sounds interesting to you, sit back, enjoy, maybe get some popcorn. I'll get on to the news now. Firstly, then, in news on policy change, Sky News noted that an MP has called for a law to change to make domestic abuse a specific offence rather than just have it included under assault. He recalled his personal experience of domestic abuse as a basis for the need for the change. Josh Barbindi, I think, the Lib Dem MP for Eastbourne, decided to share his story so that no kid would have to go through what he went through. He was physically abused by his mother's former partner, and at 4 remembers crying himself to sleep, hearing shouts and screams and smashing in the process. He described a situation where he felt safe at school but not at home, and where he was walking on eggshells at home. His recalling of his own experience featured talk about his diary entries where his own words depicted quite a helpless kid, and which showed how an abuser could take away a person's sense of self-worth. The Lib Dem MP wanted to see the law changed so that domestic abuse would be a specific offence, and so criminals couldn't hide behind the conviction of assault, which can be seen as a less worse thing, if that's possible. The lack of this specific law has been noted as one of the reasons why it's believed domestic abusers have slipped through the net in early release schemes, which we've seen 2 of in the last year. This is because there's no way to tell whether someone is just an assaulter or is actually someone that's a perpetrator of domestic abuse. That also means, as a consequence, there's no way to tell who's being released under an assault charge is actually a domestic abuser, and should really be being excluded from an early release scheme. Campaigners and victims have lack of oversight fouls them because it's rendering them unable to prepare for a perpetrator's potential release. They might need to move, they might need to change their kids' schools or shop at different places, and that isn't possible if they don't know that someone's being released. That preparation, which could save someone's health, life, general well-being, isn't possible at the moment, apparently. A spokesperson for the Ministry of Justice has said the government is building a justice system which puts victims first, but didn't address this issue fully. Labour has made pledges around protecting women and girls, but do not seem to have gone as far as the MP wants. They seem to have things about having a priority call response thing for them, but not necessarily a law specifically for domestic abuse. As such, the Lib Dem MP calling for legislative change might face a bit of an uphill battle. Actually winning it is kind of unlikely because the lack of power Parliament gives minority parties means that Labour dominate the schedule to put that thing in, so it would be an amendment, and then the government could say that, well, you have to you have to vote with the government on these amendments and therefore vote them down. That means it might not get through, especially with Labour's sizable majority. However, if this was a free vote on an amendment to legislation like this, then it might not be as clear cut. There could be a situation where MPs see it as kind of a rational change, and under a free vote decide, yep, we'll do it. Moving on then, The Times reported that Labour is considering fast-tracking the approval of big infrastructure projects. The Times reported that ministers are exploring using powers of Parliament to cut the time it takes to approve projects like railways, airports, power stations, other things like that. Currently in this country, projects are assessed against other policies and other projects to determine whether they are worth spending money on and to prioritise national spending. Projects are then assessed by a planning inspectorate What that even is, I don't know. And that is supposedly and understandably quite a long process to get a project approved. That's part of the reason why things like HS2 end up costing a lot of money in this country compared to in other places. Essentially, though, the change would mean that Parliament could use legislation to approve projects and circumvent this. That would give these projects an effective parliamentary seal of approval, which would mean this legal thing about it kind of goes away to some extent. There aren't as many checks that are needed because Parliament is sovereign in this country, which basically means Parliament has the power to override that checks and balances system. It would certainly reduce the degree of scrutiny that these infrastructure projects are getting, at least in the first instance. Obviously, you still get these campaign groups and charities and things, focus groups, all assessing like a impact of a change. So like this is similar to the Canadian Premier's plan. It is called the One Canadian Economy Act. That basically means that the government can pick and choose projects there, which then override federal laws and don't need a scrutiny process. Using a similar scheme here, the government could effectively fast track these infrastructure projects and take years off the planning process. It's something that has the possibility to mean that we can start building the third runway at Heathrow before the next election. It's also worth noting this may be able to improve growth forecasts because it means that the country will be able to exploit these infrastructure changes quicker. That in theory that would also alleviate the stress on the government to do things like tax rises, which then gives it some theoretical maybe the government will do that. We don't know that yet though. The Times said source said the policy was at an early stage, kind of adds to the uncertainty around whether we'll actually see it happen. But it's something that the government is considering and being discussed. Growth is a key priority for the government, according to the sources as well. So maybe we will see it. Maybe we won't know, I don't know. The Guardian detailed that Labour has vowed to protect a Sure Start type system from a future reform assault. Sure Start was a policy under Tony Blair's government which gave support to deprived families. It supposedly gives them a sure start to education. It's been credited by helping a load of new mothers and things like that. I'm not putting its impact down. It's just we don't need to go into what the old scheme was. I'll put an overview up on the screen as well. A new government scheme would spend £500 million on opening 1,000 new centres in a Sure Start adjacent sort of project. The Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson, has said that the new strategy would be a watershed moment for the government and families, and that the new scheme would be so deeply embedded and be an unprecedented collaboration between childminders, care providers, councils, families, schools, whatever, that it just wouldn't really be able to be unpicked by a right-wing government. Another part of this plan is that the government would parachute qualified teachers into deprived areas. It would also reduce the number of years between Ofsted inspections. It's trying to raise standards, basically. LBC noted that Starmer has staved off a backbench rebellion as the watered-down welfare bill progressed through the Commons. So Sir Stephen Timms told MPs before the third vote that if you can work, you should. If you need help to work, the government should help you, and the government should also provide those who can't work a dignity. He said those principles underpin the government's plans, and of course we've seen these plans change in the last week or so. As we found out last week, the bill now offers employment assistance. It also has some sort of review for the future of the care system in this country, but has very, very minor changes in terms of reforming care. Now it was gutted of its PIPs changes and other things throughout the process. It now has to go through the House of Lords. It has another 3 readings there, like it has here, which offers more scrutiny for the bill, means that more experts can weigh in and the bill can be shaped more. So it's likely we'll see more amendments here, although these amendments sometimes carry less weight, just purely because of the power imbalance between the Lords and the Commons. The Telegraph reported that MPs have voted on making the Premier League free to air, and then an amendment to the Football Governance Bill would make at least 10 games free to air by law. This is on top of the finals of the League Cup and the country's playoff competitions. The policy was proposed by Lib Dem MP but it was not taken forward by other parties at the general election. It was a pledge by the Lib Dems and not by the Conservatives and Labour. All that means is the possibility of it being achieved is scant or really, really remote. Labour could use its majority to make this proposal redundant, and in fact they kind of did, because the amendment was voted down. But the wider bill, the Football Governance Bill, which has now established a football regulator, an independent regulator for football in this country, passed by 415 votes for and 98 votes against it. The football regulator is apparently going to protect clubs by making them financially stable. The Telegraph also detailed that Reeves has delayed her cash ISA reform amid backlash. The Chancellor was expected to make the changes on July 15th, but it seems she has rowed back these changes and instead wants to encourage people to have a better balance between savings and stocks and shares. Building societies, experts, and just people with these cash ISAs just outright oppose the reforms en masse, basically. ITV News reports that the Bank of England will monitor cash acceptance on an ongoing basis. A Treasury Committee report raised concerns about the use of cash being rejected by places, specifically public transport and motorist infrastructure like service stations or petrol stations. It's basically leading to a two-tier society, according to this report, where the most vulnerable pay the cost by not being able to have access to these online banking services. While the government has no plans to mandate this cash acceptance, it is now monitoring it on an ongoing basis. Anyway, that concludes the news I got on policy change. I'll move on to foreign policy stuff now. In news on foreign policy, the BBC detailed the police are preparing for Donald Trump's visit to Scotland. This is not the state visit. Firstly, police in Scotland are planning for Trump to visit the country later this month. He's expected to travel to his golf resort in Aberdeenshire and open a new course there. This time around, there'll be no private meeting with the King. He won't address Parliament or anything like that. However, it's thought that Trump could make his official state visit, where these things are on the cards, in September this year. The Guardian noted that a security report has found Iran's threat to the UK is on par with Russia's. The UK is reportedly a priority espionage target for Iranian cyber attacks, ranking just behind the USA and Saudi Arabia. Strictly speaking, the headline is a little bit misleading. I sort of wish there was a show for that. Because it basically suggests Iran's threat as a whole is on par with that of Russia, which it just isn't at the moment, as far as we know. The committee specifically found things like intimidation, fear of physical attack, and assassination in the UK are on par with Russia. The intelligence officials told the committee that agents affiliated with Iran have shown a readiness and capacity to carry out assassinations within the UK and raise this threat level. That and other evidence heard for 2 years up until 2023 basically informed this report. The report therefore could be criticised as being outdated, since it doesn't include the recent arrest of 5 Iranians who were reportedly planning a terrorist attack, and it doesn't include any of the stuff going on in the Middle East since October 7th, 2023. The Cabinet Office welcomed the report. Naturally, the Iranian embassy sort of criticised it and basically said that it wholly rejected the idea that it engages in espionage in this country. The Independent reported that Starmer and Macron have agreed a joint action deal on migrant crossings. The issue of migrant crossings is a shared priority and required joint solutions, according to both the leaders. They committed to further action and innovative deterrence to disrupt the business model of illegal gangs. So far, the UK has pressed for tougher French enforcement, while France said Britain has to address the pull factors behind illegal migration. This seems to entail France deploying 1,200 staff to ensure new checks are carried out properly, and the UK will set up a safe and legal route for immigrants with a British link to come into the country safely, while returning some of those that don't. It's reportedly on a one-in, one-out basis. If it feels like I'm missing out on details here, and that you're then missing out on details, it's because I probably am. I've read stuff this week which basically says that sharing too many details could hinder the operational effectiveness of this deal, and so that not many details are shared in the first place. And from what I've read, this seems to be about it. I might be missing something, but this seems to be about it. And finally, on news on foreign policy, Sky News detailed that dozens of MPs have called for the UK government to recognise Palestine as a state. 59 MPs are calling on the government to recognise Palestine via a letter to the Foreign Secretary. A mix of centrist and left-wing Labour MPs, including some committee chairs, have wrote to the Foreign Secretary and said that by not recognising Palestine as a state, they're actively undermining the two-state solution stance that the UK government is taking on the issue. The letter demands that 5 different measures should be taken to recognise Palestine. Firstly, the official recognition of a state of Palestine. Secondly, to continue support for the UNRWA, the UN humanitarian aid body. They should also secure the release of hostages between the two actors involved, the IDF and Hamas. They should press for full and unhindered resumption of aid, which Israel has been restricting, and fully review and place restrictions on trade and supply and financial support to the illegal Israeli settlements in the West Bank. Government said it's already funding the UNRWA and is working to release the hostages held by Hamas. This is seemingly the second time MPs have formally called on the government to immediately recognise Palestine as a state. Obviously, we'll see where this time ends up. And that concludes the news I got on foreign policy. I'll move on to other politics now. In news on other politics then, The Sun detailed that Jake Berry, a former Tory chairman, has defected to Reform UK. Reform is the last chance for Britain to pull back from decline. Ending his Tory membership after 25 years, Mr Berry said the Tories have lost their way. He offered warnings that the streets are lawless, migration's out of control, and taxes are going through the roof. Berry lost his seat at the last election, and said that the old Westminster politics has failed, and the people in the country are wanting a country to be proud of again. He said the only way to get this is with Reform the UK. Berry shared a full statement, which I'll put here either side of me, but to be perfectly honest, there's probably a stupid stories thing in here where I might fact check some of this. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. Telegraph, meanwhile, reported that Starmer has pinned his hopes on a summer refresh. The PM is reportedly planning to use the summer recess of Parliament, the bit where it's not sitting, which begins on the 22nd of July, to inject more purpose into the government, i.e. reshuffling ministers. Obviously, there are no firm details on the changes or the people that could be reshuffled. It's thought that some ministers are underperforming since Labour took office. Some sources have suggested it could be Lisa Nandy, the Culture Secretary, who vacates her position. But there are many others suggesting it could just be a reshuffle of junior ministers and advisors, so we'll sort of see how that goes. The Standard noted that Reform has celebrated more by-election wins whilst taking seats from Labour and the Conservatives. Reform picked up 4 new councillors in local elections and won seats from both the main parties. They won by-elections in Rotherham, Tewkesbury, Bassetlaw and Hartlepool. This comes just weeks after they lost 2 by-elections after councillors quit just barely 2 months into their jobs. Anyway, that concludes the news I've got on other politics. I'll move on to stats and trends now. In news on stats and trends then, The Guardian reported that an inquiry has found the post office scandal might have led to more than 13 suicides. The first report from the hearings at the disastrous human impact on the 1,000+ operators who were wrongly accused of taking money from their branches because of faulty software has been released. It notes the number of people seeking financial redress was more than 10,000. On top of that, the scandal led to 4 suicides, with a possible 9 extra being unrecorded, as many deaths did go unrecorded in relation to this. A further 19 people began abusing alcohol as a result of the post office scandal, according to the report, and at least 59 considered killing themselves. Additionally, witness statements from 200 from victims, that's 200 of them, found that people suffered very significantly and had endured a degree of hardship which was severe by any standard. The report thus called for full and fair compensation, recommending the definition of a term for this compensation to be given out. Part of this would also mean legal advice is being sponsored for the people seeking financial compensation. This would help them decide whether they want, whether it's in their best interest to receive like a fixed lump sum or an assessment of their individual claim. Another part of this would mean family members being properly compensated as well. The second part of the report, which will look into the technical errors from the Horizon IT software, will not come until maybe next year, but it is now in the works after this one has concluded. The Postal Minister, Gareth Thomas, said the recommendations are immensely helpful for a guide into what is needed to finish the job in compensating the people wronged here, and that the government will respond in Parliament after actually properly considering the report. The Standard detailed that almost 40% of female Scottish respondents were victims of sexual harassment. A survey by Unite of 6,000 women, 1,143 women specifically in Scotland, found that 37.5% of Scottish women reported unwanted touches. 10% said they'd been sexually assaulted, and a further 4.6% had been a victim of sexual coercion. Unite's General Secretary called the survey results damning and said that nobody should suffer sexual harassment in the workplace. More than half of women in the rest of the UK have been victims of sexually offensive jokes or unwanted flirting. 45.6 had unwanted flirting or sexual remarks, and 13.6% said they had been shown porn by a colleague. The union's equalities officer said that legislation does not go far enough to protect women, and that creates a situation where harassment is underreported. Spokesperson for the government said that harassment is completely unacceptable and that it has no place in society, with the government expecting businesses to take a zero tolerance approach. The Guardian reported that support for the public sector doctor strikes have collapsed in the face of new action. 1 in 4 voters backed the strikes according to the latest polling. It seems the approval rating in general has fallen from 52% a year ago to 26% now. This comes from from Ipsos, although The Guardian didn't share the number of people surveyed. Finally, Sky News detailed an analyst has said the UK economy's figures are not as bad as they look, despite the fall in GDP. The UK economy shrank in May, according to official figures, by 0.1%, following a 0.3% fall in April. However, before that, there was a rise of 0.4%, so they're basically on an even keel. The decreases at the moment don't seem as significant, although if we see a further increase in the next period, we could enter a technical recession where the economy has technically shrunk over the last year rather than grown. We'll see. Anyway, that concludes the news I got this week, so please like and subscribe if you found this useful. If you thought I got something wrong, please comment it, or if you think I've got something right, also comment that because that would help me greatly. Maybe if you think this is useful, please share it with your friends as well, because I don't mind getting more viewers. And yeah, I'll see you next week.